first thing that we want to do is we want to clean up this model, make sure that the model is nice and clean and that you have some good naming conventions going on. I'm just going to go and check the history in the model. So we'll go in and have a look at the channel box as well as the attribute editor. There's quite a bit in there as well. So this is all data that we don't need anymore. This is a clean model, so first thing we'll do is delete the history. Let's clean up the model. And then I always like to give the mesh a name, so we'll call this an axe. And I like to put the identifier on as a mesh. It just makes it easier when we're looking through node graphs and things that simple C names as well. So the topology of it looks pretty cool. We've got simple flow lines going through the model, and it matches up to the reference that we had modeled it from. So now we can go ahead and make sure that everything is frozen. So you see we've got some translate in here, so we can go in and modify and freeze these transformations. And then it's a good idea to then save your mesh. So I'm going to save this mesh out, save the scene as. I'm going to change this to a my binary file, and save the scene in the scene folder. And I'm just going to call this UV setup. Okay, so we're now ready to start considering how we want the UV map to work. So I would always suggest that you create yourself a new shelf if you haven't already got one. And in this shelf we can start to add some of the tools that we're going to need. I like to always have a textured version of the object that I'm going to be doing, and also a UV layout as well. So I'm going to position my my panels so that I have them around about the right size. It doesn't really matter on the size of this because we're going to do most of the work inside this panel, and this panel is going to be converted into a UV editor. So we can change the panels based on the layout that's inside here. So if for instance we had a 4 quad panel, we could change some of these panels. This is a split panel. It remembers the size and scaling. So I'm going to bring this in and I'm going to change this to the UV editor this side. Now the UV editor is quite a large panel. This is the internal menu system for the UV editor options, but you're probably going to only need, for the simple tutorials, that much. So you can just hide those down, and this is our UVs. We'll talk about the UV space in a minute, but next thing we need to do is make sure that we've got texturing turned on. So I've got shading on, I've got wireframe on, and then I need textured on as well. You'll not see much of a difference inside here because we haven't got any other material other than default material attached to it. So once we've got this set up in this way, we can right mouse click over the two little window selectors on your left hand side toolbar, and you can save the current layout. There's a couple of ways of getting it, but there's a right mouse button, click and select. I find that's the easiest one, and I can call this my UV text layout. So UV text. Okay, so the UV text is now been saved as a layout for the system. We need to bring this onto our shelf. So I'm going to go into our Windows menu and go down to the saved layouts, and you'll see the UV text is there in the bottom of our stack. So if I hold down Control Shift and I left mouse click, the UV text window will appear on here. So I can change my layouts. We can be working in our outliner perspective view, and we can jump straight back into our UV text view. So that's a nice quick way of setting up your tool palette to get into this. Some of the other things that we might wish to have in here, let's go into our rendering settings, because this is where we're going to do some of the test renders possibly. And we might want to have our render settings in here. That's a good one to have. And we might want to have a Maya Hardware 2 render as well in there as well. So this will allow us to click on this and create a render. So there's render settings that we can bring up. And this is just making sure that we're rendering with render 2. And of course we'd need to just bring in the render current frame button as well. So we can hit this, and this gives us our viewport renderer. So it's useful for us to sort of eyeball up and make sure the graphics card is doing and telling us exactly what we're going to be seeing. So we can render that frame out, and you might want to have your frame set up, your render settings set up so that it renders the screen. You can do that in the render settings. So if you're wanting to change the resolution, for instance, these resolutions are quite wide because they're designed for cinematics, but you could quite easily change this to have something like a 1280 setting. So when we're in our render mode, you can see that this is what we would actually be rendering out. So again, it helps us when we're creating renders, creating the right renders for the type of rendering that we want to do. So that's set up. That's set up pretty cool. I've got the backgrounds on or off. You can see those, and we've got this set up. There are some UVs on there. That the UVs come from the original cylinder that was created as part of the creation of this object. Okay, so some of the other things that we might want to have on our tool shelf as we're moving through, looking at some of the options that we've got. We may well want to have some of the UV mapping tools on here pushed in. Now there's quite a long list now in Maya 2016. Some of the UV settings that we might want to use, we may want to have automatic mapping. I always like to make sure I drop that to shelf with the option box. We may want to have the best plane texturing tool, and that'll work it out. We may want to have camera-based UV mapping. We would definitely want to have the planar mapping in there, and probably the cylindrical mapping as well. And then there's some of the other ones, but these all are inside our window, and we tend to use these much more effectively inside here. So we'll probably use those in here. Okay, so we're pretty much set up now to start our UV mapping, which we'll do in the next video.